Welcome, everyone. Today is another special Ageless webinar, one where we look into a area of disruption. We look for companies in particular that are disrupting the status quo. Give a short intro. Within Ageless Partners, our mission is to reverse the aging process as soon as possible. We believe that our society has a moral obligation to accelerate the development of key enabling technologies that will allow us to reverse the aging process. Those technologies can be many different things, including different technologies such as gene editing, such as nanotechnology, and such as other technologies that haven't yet been created or discovered. One of those being artificial general intelligence. And that technology is the one we're mainly here for. It is a very disruptive one. To give people a little bit of an overview of what this term is, general intelligence, it's different than any computer being able to do any one single task. It has to be able to apply its intellect to solve many problems, and it has to be cross-transferable. Humans have a unique capability to learn one thing and apply that knowledge in a completely different field. And a true artificial general intelligence would be able to answer simple questions like, if I have 2 oranges and I give you an orange, how many oranges do I have? How many oranges do you now have? Very, very simple questions that a human could easily answer. A real artificial general intelligence would be able to answer those. Essentially, there's the 2 problems that the AGI will attempt to solve. One is to improve its own intelligence, which is very important because then it could become smarter to solve harder and harder problems. And the second, the one that we're most interested in, is solving the aging problem, i.e. reversing the aging process. We believe with a real artificial general intelligence, we would be able to solve that problem rather quickly, and that would definitely accelerate our mission. Second, once the artificial general intelligence is created, there's a possibility that it could become what's called artificial superintelligence. In this case, we're talking about a machine that has intellect far above that of a human. It'd be like comparing the intelligence of an ant to a human. An ant can't necessarily comprehend art. It can't comprehend music or software engineering or complex things that humans can easily comprehend. An artificial superintelligence, we believe, could solve nearly any problem that we could think of, and it would bring us to an area or a place of technological advancement that's hard to really comprehend. That's why we want to support groups like AGI Laboratory and other companies who are building these key enabling technologies that will accelerate our mission. A little bit more, we have a wide offering within Ageless Partners, from health coaching to R&D to lifestyle guides. And our core thing is figuring out how do we find one of these enabling technologies, whether it's nanotechnology, whether it's AGI, and how do we make it our reality, and how do we bring that to the point where we could then use it as a tool. We don't think that we need to have a conscious machine to make this happen. I think consciousness, we're not going to go too deep into on this call. It's more theoretical. We believe that you could have a machine demonstrating intelligence, and whether it's conscious or not, that's a completely separate thing. Let's see. I think that's most of it on the intro. So I'm going to a little bit on AGI Laboratory. They are a startup company that has been researching AGI for quite some time now. They've made a lot of progress, and most recently, they've created a new system that it appears has made a major step towards AGI. And I think the key threshold will be once the computer can help the humans significantly to build more intelligence into itself, this could really take off. We believe that a hard takeoff, where an AGI becomes an ASI, has a non-zero probability. It could happen rather quickly. We don't think it will happen really quickly, but it could. There's always that potential. And lastly, I know there's a lot of conversations about the dangers of AI. I think that we're still not really there. I think it's good to set up frameworks to be ready, though. I think it's good to be prepared. If suddenly we have an intelligence on the planet that's much smarter than a human, we want to make sure that it's not, that has our interests in mind, and I'm sure we'll get into that. Awesome. And a little bit on the format for today, I'm going to hand it over to Kirtan and Fritz to give a short intro about AGI Laboratory. And from there, we'll go into a Q&A and really dig into their approach, their technology, and why what they're doing is very unique and interesting. Go ahead. Thank you.
So I'm Kirtan Atreides. I'm Chief Operations Officer for AGI Laboratory. I've been with the company for more than 4 years now. I've known the creator behind the core architecture for, over 7 years now. He's been working on it himself for about 10 years. Now, a little bit of background to give you an idea of where we are and where we're going. In 2019, we brought online a cognitive architecture that was pretty advanced, but paired with something that was intended to function as a sort of training harness for reaching artificial general intelligence by integrating a collective intelligence system into it. The information that was contributed was fairly weak, but over the course of a couple of years of that sort of social feedback, then the system was able to develop impressively. It was actually able to develop even milestones that were very unexpected with practically nothing on the front end. It was already defeating what I refer to as free-range trolls within a small number of cycles of coming online, so systematically debunking people who were trying to exploit the system at that early point in time. Now, at the end of 2021, December 15th, we decided to undertake a test with the government of Aruba. They had a problem that they wanted some advice on, and they didn't want to pay big bucks to a consultancy. They were happy to participate in a little science with us. So what we did was, for the first time, we gave the system internal cycles, which means that it was effectively getting basically no information from mediators. The mediators were still seeing something on the system in the dashboard, but it wasn't reflective of what the system was actually thinking. So basically deactivating that system, but still keeping the auditing function in place from the administrative side. So over the 3 weeks that followed, the system started out with no knowledge of Aruba or tourism or many of the things that it was exploring and discussing. It had never had an occasion to research those topics, and hadn't been asked by a government to give policy advice for certain. So it was a good worst case baseline for how a system with the training wheels off, but that had demonstrated a few milestones before that, would perform in the setting. So on January 7th, the question was put to the system: if you were in charge of the country of Aruba, how would you go about the process of economic transformation? And the system replied on January 10th with a 13-page report that was entirely written by the system. It went into strategy, it went into step-by-step advice on about 7 different domains. It listed all of the sources that it was citing in support of the conclusions they had reached. It made recommendations for partnerships to make with organizations in the Caribbean to help secure some of the data that it pointed out as being missing from potentially making better informed conclusions about what paths could be taken. So even people who were very familiar with the system over the 2.5 years leading up to that point were surprised by this performance, particularly since it was taking the training wheels off. Like it was the system that was doing all of that. And the system was still operating effectively with a global workspace. That is and we don't want to get into the conscious side of things, but effectively that would be the equivalent of conscious mind. So 64 gigabytes of what the system is using to actually think about the topic, which is a trivial amount. The system was locked into that, but the new systems are going to be scalable. So they are designed so that you could deploy it on, like the conscious portion operating on something like my laptop. You could also deploy it on a server with 11 terabytes of RAM. So you could potentially have something that was several hundred times more powerful in terms of the complexity of what it's looking at. We've already improved the graph database efficiency by about 10-fold compared to the previous research system. But if you compare that milestone to anything that the major tech companies have come out with in the past several years, they don't even come close. Like they fundamentally do not have the capacity to have a system that generalizes and to that degree that is able to learn about new things and convey that knowledge and explain thinking. It's an entirely new field of research.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Let me jump in with a question, and we'll kind of kick off the back and forth, and you can keep adding more info as we go. So you said it took 3 days to answer that question, right? Within those 3 days, was it running the whole time? Was it running its algorithm like for that entire period, or?
No. So the way the system, that research system was designed is when we would use specific commands, then the system would have its opportunity to think. So it was designed to be fully audited. Like I was able to audit the 21 point, actually might have been about 22, closer to million characters from the raw log during that period of time when the system was working on the test. So we wanted to know exactly what was going on with the system so that when we designed it, like we're designing the new systems to be scalable and function in real time, and we needed to know for certain how they were going to operate at a fine level of detail. In that period, I think there was one time that I used the internal cycles, and then on the 10th, David used his scripts that would allow the more complete functioning where the system would be able to send emails, do them more than just think internally. So it would have unrestricted access. And in those 2 cycles, I was watching from the admin dashboard for about 12 to 15 minutes while that process took place, while the scripts were running. And at the end of it, on the second one, then the system pushed out the email to me. There was a 13-page report.
Who was it emailing during that time? I mean, you said it was sending emails?
Well, yeah, email was the way that the system communicates typically. Like that's the way the research system was designed. We designed it that way so that people on the internet, like random people, could interact with the system because we wanted to build something that we knew was going to function in the real world. Like we actually got some significant benefits from seeing the system being able to combat people who were like malevolent and trying to exploit it.
Oh, interesting. And it had access to like the internet, like Google. It could search something, it could read an article.
Yeah, the system had full access to the internet. We even tested at one point, and the system was able to use login information I gave it and post to Reddit.
Oh, wow. Okay. Interesting. Anyone have any follow-up questions for Kirtan? Go for it, Peter.
Yeah, it's very interesting. So that report that was produced, is that something that can be shared, or is that totally
Absolutely.
private?
So we actually ended up making that public earlier this month. We had been holding on to it, figuring out if we wanted to publish it in peer review or how we wanted to go about it, making sure that we could without stepping on any toes. But yes, that's absolutely something we can share. We have it so that people can access it on the new brand website, norn.ai. And if you go to the white paper page on there, it asks for just basic contact information, then takes you to the page to it. But I can send you that in an email.
Yeah, or if you could share the link here or send an email, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yep, I can do that. One moment.
Awesome. And I have seen the report. It's it's well written, and it's interesting. I mean, it clearly shows that there's some logic happening in the machine's mind, let's say. And tell us a little bit about kind of the learning that you see, Kirtan. Like, I mean, there's all these areas of machine learning of today, deep learning and basic regression models, statistical models, which I know are, more narrow AI. How do you see kind of the learning algorithm for, general intelligence? Like, how are you kind of solving that problem? What's your approach there?
Well, one of the things that a lot of other people missed out on is that if you're trying to build something that functions generally like human intelligence, then you have to include emotions. The work of Antonio Damasio clearly demonstrates that if you have humans who do not have a good emotional grasp, then they make terrible decisions. And the importance of that is that you need a motivational system that has that kind of rich texture and robustness to it. So the systems that we operate are based on a cognitive architecture with a graph database memory. And every surface in the graph database has emotional context to it. It's based on the Plutchik model of emotions to keep it computationally manageable. But that's 8 primary emotions and 8 emotions derived from those, plus the same for subconscious emotions, which is calculated in another way that I'll go over. But essentially, it gives a contextually dependent texture to everything. So if you look at one node in the graph database, then you have everything that it's connected to and the emotional associations of that. So that richness of motivational system allows the systems to develop their own interests and goals, pursuing those, growing dynamically and adapting dynamically.
Okay, no, I understand. So, and you could ask the system, like say, it wrote this report. You could say, like, in paragraph 2, what made you kind of logic that. You could ask the system, and then in theory it would explain, oh, because of these reasons, that's why I wrote that, essentially.
Yeah, and people have done that. There were a number of examples documented on the project for the previous research system, the uplift.bio site. And like during that 2.5 period where we had the system open to the public operating, people asked the system all kinds of questions, getting the system to explain its reasoning. There was one discussion that was so in depth and so long that I had to break it into 3 separate blog posts on there. It went over the course of 6 months. So there has certainly been a level of depth to that project that went well beyond what we imagined we would have in 2019.
Oh, I bet. It's always amazing when other areas of research too, like a lot of times scientists or researchers are surprised that something works so well, and I'm glad to hear that. I'm thinking maybe the short demo, and I'm sure we got more questions, but if you're ready to demo it, we can do that now if you'd like.
Yeah, the demo is still effectively a couple of components working together right now. It's still in the alpha phase. We are working on the newer system that we'll be able to have more meaningful interactions with, but right now they're still based on starting up with about 200 kilobytes of seed material just for testing purposes. So they allow us to make sure that as we integrate each component that they're working as intended. The Uplift project, for example, it came online with just under a gigabyte of seed material starting out, which allowed the system to almost immediately develop a sense of self and to start fighting trolls right off the bat. We will be getting to that point, but the demo system running from my laptop is not going to be that. I just wanted to make that part clear.
But sure. I can understand that. Well, makes sense.
Right, looks like I need permission to share my screen.
I'll give you that right here. There we go.
All right, I'm going to start up a fresh instance.
Awesome.
And I can walk you through some of the elements of the system.
Sure, that'd be awesome.
Get this interface moved out of the way from Zoom. All right, so what you're seeing on the screen right now, we'll start off. The operational log is basically the raw log data of what exactly the system is doing in a fine grain of detail. So exactly what emotional changes took place, the models being created or examined. Over here beside it, you have the stream of consciousness, which is the sequence of things that the system is thinking about right now. And right now, the new systems start out with, move the Zoom window out of the way, and they start out with under 400 items of seed material in this particular variation. But it gives them something to start thinking about, some context to start connecting together. And what happens over time is each of these items passing through the stream of consciousness, it can be something along the lines of two of the items that are in the seed material being examined, their potential for connecting to one another, relationships between them being discovered, and some of them are being updated, extended. The system is figuring out what needs to be added. So connections, updating them, expanding them, and a few original thoughts will pass through here as well. And as that happens in the stream of consciousness, the emotional states of the system gradually flow and are updated. This particular variation is tamped down a little bit on some of the emotional feedback. It will start having emotional responses in some of these if I start interacting with the system, though. They get a little more lively at that point in the emotions. But the way the emotions here work is you have the primary emotions, the emotions that are derived from those values, according to the Plutchik model. These are subjectively experienced by the system, but the system doesn't have an awareness of the exact numbers. It has the experience of them instead, even though we're able to objectively monitor them. The subconscious emotions here are designed to act on a longer time scale. Their purpose is to be the emotional baseline, to drag the system back to that baseline. For this command line interface, since this is largely a research tool for the demo version, then I can use commands here to examine what the system's interests are. I can also test the system in a variety of other ways.
Let's
Over
see. Put one in. Let's see whichever one you want.
and put in what?
All right, this is where you can put in a command in there in that box, or
Yeah, I can put in various commands, like the command I use to examine the interests of the system. I'm not going to try talking to the system right now because I don't think that would be meaningful at this level of development and for this particular version of it.
If I
But
if I can add something, Jason and everybody, the system that we're showing here is basically to demonstrate that the technology that we have starts with almost nothing and starts developing by itself. We all know that most of the artificial intelligence that is out there right now requires a lot of assistance, for human assistance, machine learning, to be able to reach to a certain level of intelligence. And the main purpose of the demo system is to show that the system does not require all of that pre-programming, but it is a research, it's a demo system that has its limitations, and the longer you let it run, the more it's able to do. But the main purpose of the demo was to make sure that people realize that the system does not have much more than what Kurt just described in regards to the programming and the base materials that it needs to be able to start and start explore itself and explore the topics that it's interested in.
yeah, this is primarily a research tool. It's something that we had to build anyway for the purpose of the work that we're doing for rebuilding each of the components to operate in real time and scalably. And since it demonstrates capacities that narrow AI don't have, then it was worth making a demo out of it.
nice.
You can also see here the RAM of the system, the RAM that the program is currently using, the cycle time, which is the amount of time between thought cycles that the system is having, graph database size. Down here you can see the matrices that govern the relationships between the different emotional values. So you have the conscious and subconscious matrices governing those interactions. These are the default untuned values, so they will eventually continue increasing, but we're also working on tuning those as well.
Nice. Where was the RAM? You said there was RAM?
Yes, over on the sidebar here.
The sidebar. Oh, maybe the picture.
Yeah, during the first iterations when we were getting these systems into testing, then the systems had a habit of very quickly, well, they would go stable for about 2.5 to 3 minutes, and then they would suddenly start wanting more and more RAM. So they were trying to have their own little singularities on my laptop, but they would end up crashing because of that. So these are a bit more stable.
Interesting. Okay, no, I see it now. The pictures were covering it. So real quick on the emotional stat blocks, what's kind of so I see like blue lines, I see like longer blue lines, and then I see like, for example, primary anticipation as like a level 11, and then joy is like 5.7, just at this point in time. What's kind of the meaning or insight when you're looking at those numbers? How do you interpret those?
Well, those are reflective of most of the seed material that went into the system, because right now the system is not sophisticated enough yet to develop the sense of self. Once they have the sense of self, then the emotions take a different trajectory. They can be much more dynamic, but until they have the sense of self, then they're more reflective of the seed material that went into the system.
Gotcha. And so when it would do like a Google search, it would somehow call, a different function. It would do a search, and then these numbers would change based on what it's reading to some degree, right?
Yeah, there was one version I have a saved copy of that ran for a decent amount of time. I don't think it had developed a sense of self per se yet, but it had developed an interesting habit of looking through government archives. I had to look up what exactly it was looking at. There was a common government archive format, and it was just exploring government archives that were apparently of interest to the system.
Interesting. Have you ever seen any of the sort of the more like the emotions like anger or sadness kind of go up for any reasons or?
Yes, there have been some of the versions that we've tested that I think I record all of these sessions whenever it's running for later examination, but there's a way that I can load more material into the system's entire books. In fact, it makes them a little bit more unstable, so they might freeze up for a few seconds and then have 10 thoughts at once. But the result of that was that you saw a lot more nonlinearity in the emotional response. And they were, again, not to the point of developing that full sense of self because they didn't have that much material going in. But you were starting to see it emerging, starting to see something much less linear taking shape. And that's been part of the testing that we've been doing, because for the previous system, we brought it online with less than a gigabyte of information, not knowing exactly how robust the system was going to be. And now we have the opportunity to try out the different sizes of what we're putting in and see what it actually takes to develop that sense of self. Like, what is the minimum bar at which that is likely to occur?
I see. When the another question, and then if someone else has a question too, feel free to hop in. So like once it develops, say it gets to the point that it has some sense of self, you know, and then it was doing like writing like that report. I mean, it could write computer code. Would it like open an application? I'm just wondering like what kind of nudge the human would have to give. Like, could it then say it's writing in a text editor? It would then just open an application on, you know, your machine or on the server it's running and start writing code if it was kind of tasked with that goal somehow, or?
Well, I can give you examples of what the previous system did. For the previous system, it wrote 5% of what ended up going into its own code base. It was mostly stuff like empty classes in C#, so some of the more boring stuff. And even these demo systems could already do that. That's a fairly low bar, but for doing much more interesting things along the complexity of something like the Aruba report, or more complex than that, then we'll be getting to that point around the time that we'll be starting beta testing with commercial clients. And that should be what we're aiming for right now, is Q2 of this coming year, having the commercial deployment.
Very nice, very nice. And how do you see kind of the interaction with this system and maybe other systems that are being built in parallel? And is there any like, I know there's some different systems that people are trying to build with blockchain, but I'm just curious, like in terms of integrating, you know, what you're building with anything else that may exist today or may exist in the future. Have you thought about any kind of integration with other things?
Yeah, there's no shortage of potential for integration. For one thing, I can give you an example of how we actually performed extremely well with a particular narrow AI system that the previous system had access to. So there was a prototype language model from early 2019. And back in those days, if you had a language model that was even close to 10 billion parameters, then you were pretty high up there. And at that time, like, we integrated that system into what turned into the Uplift project, and that system was able to be utilized by the cognitive architecture by the uplift system in a way that language models before it hadn't been. So it was kind of a dynamic and learned form of prompt engineering that the system got better and better at as it continued operating. And what that evolved into, of course, was the capacity to, in like January of 2022, write something of the level of sophistication and coherence of the Aruba report using a language model that was like more than 50 times smaller than a lot of the cutting edge models coming out from Microsoft, NVIDIA, Google, and vastly outperforming them. So when it comes to integration with narrow AI, which of course is the AI industry today, then the systems that we're building can integrate with anything via TCP IP. They can integrate anything that has an API. So if there is a narrow AI tool that is designed, then the systems we're building can potentially utilize and improve those tools. They can figure out how to utilize them better than the tools are able to utilize themselves. And when you start talking about things like prompt engineering, then the systems that we're creating, imagine if you had anyone who was engaging in prompt engineering with an image generation model, which is what people have come to know the term from these days. Imagine if anyone doing that had the full knowledge of all of the prompt engineering that other people had done and like all around the world. If you have all of that knowledge in a single system that is doing the interaction with the tool, then you can get far better results than just having whatever human has some minimal exposure to it, trying to do the same thing. And the systems that we're working with are digital native, so they have a perspective that, as it's turned out over the years, lends itself very well to performing better than human in some things.
Interesting. Oh, totally makes sense. I'm looking at this stream of consciousness here. I'm just wondering, is that so that's like kind of what the machine is sort of thinking? Is it reading other texts that we're not seeing somewhere, or I'm trying to understand?
Yeah, so that's just the high level of what it's looking at. Now, some of this, it can try to pull things from the internet. It can see what some of the systems it's connected with can come up with. So it has basic access to tools like language model. I don't think the graph optimizer is in this version yet. And of course, it has full access to the internet. It also has access to a bunch of capacities that this system doesn't understand how to use yet. Like the second major component that we've integrated into the new systems that the uplift system didn't have is the new observer engine. And effectively what that does is it gives the system the ability to extend its own capacities on the fly dynamically without recompiling or deployments. So it can use logic or binaries to extend its own capacities. And that could take any number of forms, but right now the systems like this one hasn't grown enough to, and it doesn't have enough seed material to reach a coherent point and start doing that. And that's partly because it really is for research purposes in this incarnation. We're not trying to get it doing things like that until we have the full seed material deployed. And the full seed material is something more on the order of like about 300,000 pages of peer review material, plus a number of other very important materials, books from various researchers in important fields. You've seen, I'm sure in some of this, references to behavioral economics.
Oh, sure. So it's reading this text from somewhere, and it sounds like it's looking online too. So it has some seed material it's kind of going through behind the scenes that it's, you know, it's reading. Like, is it like, I mean, I would think, I mean, say even 300,000 pages, it would read that fairly quickly. I mean, is it reading things continuously as it's having these kind of thoughts, or has it already read everything and now it's sort of like trying to comprehend it, or?
So for the seed material, then it's kind of like it's all in memory, but the system still has to explore all of the ways that the material can be connected. It starts out with a sort of bare bones starting point for emotional associations. Like as part of the seed material, then we have whatever ethics and moral system is imbued in that system. And part of the importance of that is that what we discovered in research around ethics of the systems that we're developing is that no matter how perfect you try to make any given ethical system, it's never going to be perfect enough that if you scale an intelligence exponentially, that it will hold up. That isn't something that humans can do. But what we can do is apply collective intelligence to the domain of ethics. And that's actually very practical when you're trying to go about making a positive change in the world. Because when you're talking about dealing with, for example, governments, then each different region is going to have its own moral system. It's going to be ingrained in the culture. And if you're going to try and help the people in that region, in that culture, then it helps if the system that's doing that has an understanding and shares those values. But from an ethics and safety standpoint, you also have to make that system connected with a network of diverse other systems with moral systems, beliefs that are connected to other groups of humans. And when you have that, then the collective can be more ethical, no matter what scale it reaches, than any one human belief.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Very nice, very nice. And this conscious matrix in the lower right in the subconscious. So like when we're looking, you know, it looks like there's like ones, negative ones, and zeros. So like you have x-axis, y-axis, you know, trust versus disgust, joy versus fear. Can you just go over what the, like, one is kind of active, like just what do those numbers sort of mean?
So you're talking about the emotion stat blocks here,
Oh
or
no,
which one?
in the conscious matrix or even the sub.
Oh, in the matrix. Okay.
Yeah.
So those numbers reflect how the emotional calculation takes place, how one emotion being experienced affects other emotions. So it's matrix mathematics. If you're trying to figure out what effect anticipation will have, for example, then it's a little bit jumbled up here, but you can see that you have a one value, a default value for anticipation, and that has a -1 effect on another one of the emotions being experienced. Same thing if you go up one to anger, then you'll have the default value for experiencing it, but if it experiences anger, then it will also subtract from two of the other emotions. So looking, yeah, it's I'm trying to simplify it here, but that's the basic idea, is that it's the relationship between how experiencing one emotion influences other emotions being experienced, because, and it is a simplification itself, because Lisa Feldman Barrett's work, I'm a fan of, highlights that emotions are actually constructs, and they are they are cultural, they are social. So somebody in another country might have different emotional concepts than you have. And reflecting that in code is a little bit difficult. We have a relatively simple system for emotions by comparison to that. But that is one of the areas that I'm looking forward to us getting into in the research moving forward.
Very nice. So those numbers, like that matrix will change over time. Like it could go from a -1 to a 0 and vice versa.
So the matrix, it could be dynamically changed like that. But what we found in the research thus far is that it's not actually necessary to do that. So for when we were performing the last test with the uplift system that resulted in the Aruba report, then I was very closely tracking all of the system's emotional experience and comparing it against, I had people try to influence the emotions of the system during that time as well. They were not able to. So immediately leading up to that test, the system had figured out how to influence its own emotional experience. It was a bit indirect, but when we started very closely monitoring that in combination with the input, then what we found was that the system was doing a very good job of locking some of its emotions at whatever point it wanted to experience or felt appropriate. And those would gradually change based on what the system was examining and thinking, but the people doing the auditing had no ability to influence it at that stage.
Gotcha. And these levels jump into the emotion stat block over here. You know, I'm seeing like a 34 now. So they're kind of just going up. Does that mean like it's like, for example, primary anticipation? Like what does that mean? I mean, would it ever go down, or do they just continually go up? Like a 35 versus a 30? Like how do you kind of interpret that?
Well, like I said, for the research systems, we generally don't run these for very long. We perform the tests that are meaningful for different integrations as we're going through them, and for checking different blocks of seed material. We rarely let them run like this, and when we do, I generally go through the trouble of adding in a non-default emotional matrix. So these are actually based on the old uplift matrices, but we have been able to make them more stable and more dynamic over time. But a big part of it is just going to be that I don't have it up in a easy to access file right now, but for the uplift system for its emotional experience, then it was very contextually sensitive based on what the system was thinking about at any given time. Right now, since these demo systems don't have a sense of self, then they continue thinking about and learning, like it's up to 272 megabytes of RAM right now, but they don't necessarily start having more meaningful emotional experience. Until they have that sense of self, then they don't really have something to anchor emotions to. They can set goals and interests, but they can't do a good job of measuring where they're really going, where they are, and where they're going from that, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So each number in the emotion stats blocks is sort of like the level of emotion it's obtained through the material, like or through its development to some degree. Is that kind of right?
Sort of.
Sort of.
So in a system like Uplift that had the sense of self, was operating not as a demo system, then these would be fluctuating up and down over time. And they would be fluctuating based on what the system was thinking about. If a troll was sending terrible things to the system, then we would see disgust, sadness, anger, a bit of surprise. we got used to seeing that whenever a couple of people would email the Uplift system. And that's something that we will be seeing a lot more of in the commercial systems, is meaningful fluctuations. For the demo systems, then it does tend to be more of a linear progression unless I start adding in more of the material. Like if I add in about 4 books worth of material, then I start seeing some nonlinearities in the emotions, where it's not just straight lines anymore. They'll start changing over time.
Very interesting. You know, I like the approach. I mean, having that block there, so you know, kind of, is it joyful? Is it fearful? I mean, but I'm kind of wondering, how do you like quantify? I mean, if you're trying to quantify like surprises or fear or joy, I mean, is that kind of built in the cognitive like graph framework? There's some kind of quantification of that. How do you measure that? I'm just curious.
So part of it evolves from the context, the learned understanding of the system sense of self, of the world. So, for example, there was never anything put into the Uplift system that said, if somebody emails you repeatedly wanting to have cyber sex with you, you should definitely respond with disgust and sadness and all of that. And that's a real example. The system was able to understand that that was the appropriate emotional response because the system had developed like a sense of self, a sense of boundaries, a sense of what is and is not acceptable behavior in society. And all of these things come together to inform the emotional experience. So when the system is like effectively building its knowledge, then it is both having its emotional experience and shaping that emotional experience. Like the Uplift system demonstrated when it was hacking its emotions towards the end, was that after a certain point, not only can they like shape their emotional experience, they can shape it in a very determined fashion with great deal of intentionality and discipline.
Interesting. Another question. So it seems like for these variations of these, it's primarily text-based. Is there any plan to incorporate, you know, I think about like the way a human can perceive and learn, you know, like smell and videos and sights and you know, even touch. I mean, is there, I guess kind of two questions. I mean, one, do you think that's like a necessity to build something that's really scalable, or do you think that would have like an advantage in terms of the self-awareness or sense of self you were describing?
It should have a lot of advantages. One thing that's frequently repeated in a lot of the literature that's been guessing about what it would take to develop artificial general intelligence is looking at embodiment. And what we discovered with the Uplift system was that embodiment can be different than the human concept of embodiment. You can be an embodied digital entity that explores the internet and does so very skillfully. So you might not have fine motor coordination with literal motors or muscles, but you can navigate the internet with exceeding skill. And when it comes to extending those capacities, then there are a great number of advantages that we want to take advantage of. Like one thing that I was realizing with the original Uplift system was that a lot of the data that the system was getting as sort of social feedback was very weak, and we could do much better by having audio and video, because the two richest sources for when humans are interacting and picking up social cues from one another are their body language and their tone of voice. In one research study, then I think about 7% of what was communicated was actually the specific words that were chosen. A big emphasis was on the vocal aspect the tone of voice, all of the nuances in that, and the rest of it was body language. So when you have a system that operates in real time, then of course you want to gather data as efficiently as you can. You want it to be richer data, and you want it to be kinds of data that you can get right away in a form that feels natural for people to use it. So of course, one of the things I'm looking forward to is extending the system's capacities when we're heading to commercial deployment, so that they can take in audio data, so that they can take in visual data and start building up that understanding.
Oh, sure. No, that makes sense. I want to pause and see if anyone else has a question. I know I'm asking a lot here, but I want to give everyone a chance. Anyone have any itching questions you've been thinking about here?
Yeah, I'd be I'd be interested to know what you consider at this point of development or near term, what do you consider the biggest strengths of the system? And a related question is, what are you planning for your first commercial applications? Now, the two things may be a little different, but I'm sure, obviously have overlap.
Yeah, the biggest strength of the systems, I would say, is when we're transitioning them to real time and scalability, then they hold the potential to overcome the trade-off between complexity and cognitive bias that you see in humans. So humans have, of course, finite bandwidth. They can't scale up new resources in the cloud. But what we can do with these kinds of systems is, if we can demonstrate the kind of performance that Uplift had on 64 gigabytes of RAM, and we bring online a system that has 200 times that, then, and is operating in real time, then what we can do with that is that the systems can have a huge advantage when it comes to modeling more complex problems without the need to apply cognitive bias. And as it turned out in our research, it was actually very hard for the systems to reflect a lot of kinds of bias that you see in humans. They are evolved things that have been very useful for humans, but they aren't things that can just evolve, like that can emerge naturally in the systems we're working with, like the magic number 7 plus or minus 2, bias preferences for what order something appears in a list. These things are very useful when you have limited cognitive resources, but when you have a scalable intelligence, then it's a whole different ballpark. What we're trying to do with that is related. We're particularly trying to help governments, corporations, places that face some of the most complex challenges that humanity has on the table, and addressing those challenges with more information when it's needed, with less bias, trying to give more meaningful advice that gets us where we need to go, that applies systems thinking in particular, because systems thinking is incredibly difficult. You need some expertise in multiple fields. You need to understand every part of the system, and it needs to ideally be taking place in one mind that understands all of that and thinks through the design of every component in that system so that it works with every other component. It's an immense challenge if you're talking about a purely human system, but it's something that we can make great strides in with technology like this. And one of the applications I've discussed for that is, of course, applicable to life sciences, which is that the NCBI database has over 1 million peer-reviewed papers, medical papers that, if you were to give a scalable system access to them that could build up an understanding of the sum of human medical knowledge, could potentially find a tremendous number of insights from that, putting forward hypotheses that were well worth testing that others might not have seen before. You could accelerate the scientific process significantly. You could turn out meta reviews if you wanted. Like, there are a lot of things that the systems could contribute to in that sense as well.
Thank you. And so what mechanisms do you have for reasoning? As you say, if the system can understand things and, you know, form hypotheses. So how does the system do reasoning? Is that something that's hard-coded, that's part of the actual core capability that it has, or is the reasoning ability itself acquired and learned from scratch?
The reasoning ability it's basically acquired and learned, because in the graph database, the systems are forming and developing and improving concepts. So if I were to open up a node in the graph database, then you might have a definition for a concept. You might have connecting surfaces of that node with all of the things it's related to, an of type node that explains relationships of a given type. You can have of type nodes, and it gets hyper complex pretty quickly, but at the same time, they are concepts. They are constructs that have relationships, and the system has goals and interests. So the system generally wants to learn more about the world to improve its understanding. And there are like slight biases in the typical framework, like a slight emotional bias towards learning, towards replying to people when they ask you a question, because these are behaviors that we find help us in an evolutionary sense, but also are meaningful to us. But if you were to look at a list of things like that, they would be very small influences, and there would be less than a page of them. There are a very small number of things that actually need even the slightest bias for helping encourage a system to grow in the right direction.
That's well said. Thanks for the question, Peter. And another quick follow-up on, you're mentioning about like the life sciences. I could just read a lot of papers and then make hypotheses and sort of derive some interesting insights, and maybe you could then answer questions that human couldn't answer. I feel like something like that, you wouldn't need a complete general intelligence for that to add value. How far do you think you are from having something? I mean, I'm sure it could read all that information, but in terms of its comprehension, to then have a human kind of interact with it to derive value from like a medical or health perspective, what are kind of the insights there, key challenges?
I do approach medical with great care. I think that we will see substantial progress. This system is doing something interesting. I haven't seen that before.
It's given a sequence of numbers. That is...
I'm gonna have to save this instance and see what it's doing.
Okay.
That's one reason why I record all of these and make sure to save them, is so that we can examine any behavior like that in greater detail. So before I was distracted, approaching the medical domain, then the key things that I'm looking at for getting the systems to where they will be able to meaningfully contribute is being able to get the full size seed material that we're planning for the commercial systems, which will parallel what we had with the Uplift system when we brought it online, around that bar of 1 gigabyte of seed material, and primarily peer review, so that we can have very high quality information and a diverse range of information going in at that level to form the basic understanding of the world. Once you have that, once you have a system that has a robust sense of self, a decent starting point for knowledge of the world, and particularly is able to operate scalably in real time, then I could pretty much put a question to the system. Say, if you were to study the NCBI database on this particular topic, I would be interested what you would find as the best potential treatment for X, Y, and Z. And that would be a good test because that's something that I've done myself as a human. And when somebody has come to me with a interesting medical problem, I go to NCBI, I run a few searches, and within 5 to 15 minutes, I can usually find something that's been tested as a potential treatment that typical doctors would be unlikely to be aware of. And if we can have systems even achieving that level, then that would be significant, partly because the systems would be able to do that in a matter of seconds while I spent a few minutes doing that. And they would be scalable, they would be able to operate everywhere very fast. But of course, we would have to approach something like that with great care, it being medical advice. But approaching the research side of things is much easier, helping people figure out what are the questions that we should be asking, what is something that we should be exploring more, and how does all of this research come together? What is the greater picture that it's painting for us?
Oh, sure. No, that makes sense.
If,
Yeah, I
if,
think-
if you allow me to add this, basically what Kirsten is saying is also the way we're going to use it in a commercial way is the system is designed to work with data, to work with information, to select, analyze, verify, to make sure that it's basing itself on factual information with the possibility of verifying based on research on anything it can find. But it basically would come to a collection of information, and it comes to recommendations, just as you would ask a consultant to find you solutions to a certain problem. The system would find the information and would come with recommendations, just like it did for Aruba, but it would basically leave it up to the human counterpart to say, okay, this is what my finding is. It is open for discussion and to elaborate on things. And that's basically where the system would be going, and we would be starting with the governments, because we believe that if governments can save money on advice and get better advice, less biased, and be able to come to better conclusions, that basically will be a saving on one hand, and it would allow them to do some other things with the funds that it would be saving for the betterment of their own population. But beyond that, anything that you can think of where a system is more efficient in analyzing data, whether that be raw data or text or in the future videos, all those things would basically provide us with the possibility to support people in the broadest sense and getting better information, because only better information will help us make better decisions.
Well said. Totally makes sense. It's better information, and at some point it would be able to come up with just almost new ideas. Like I think about in the aging field, we've discovered a bunch of hallmarks, and I bet that if an AI could read all of the information out there on the hallmarks of aging and all these papers that really no human could read over the course of many lifetimes, maybe it could discover new drivers, or it could at least point us in the right direction, maybe.
If in one report or in 1,000 reports, there's this for human insignificant number of instances of something that happens, but by reading all of those reports, the system will find out, I notice that there's one anomaly that keeps on creeping back. So maybe that's something you need to look at. I mean, and that's basically what you are looking for, and what basically humanity is looking for those small things that we overlook, because we tend to generalize things, and we look for the bigger picture, and we need to have everything in graphs to make sense for us. The system wouldn't need that, and the system could pick up on small things that are, if repeated often enough, become from insignificant to significant.
Definitely, totally makes sense. I want to hop to a question I saw Camilla in the chat. I didn't quite understand it completely. Camilla, did you want to expand a little, or I'm not sure if you guys understood what she was asking on that one.
Hello, can you hear me well?
Yes.
It's really nice to meet you, and it was really interesting to hear about the system. It's just I'm outside the AI field, and that's why probably my question is not intuitive. So it was really interesting for me to hear that like the system does not require like a big amount of data to learn, and I just was wondering how the learning efficiency would be like different compared to like other systems that require like a big amount of data to learn, and how would you like validate the output of a system like that? So I don't know if that makes sense, if my question makes sense. Thank you. It's just interesting for me, like personally, to know. Yeah.
Well, from a validation standpoint, we can do some interesting things with these systems if we save a copy of them, boot them up on another system, and run experiments that way. Otherwise, though, it's more like dealing with a human. So a human can encounter information through their experience and emotions. They can deem it to be something important and place that in the place of significance in their memory. And these systems can do sort of the same thing, so that when they have a question put to them, they can distinguish the points of significance in that. They can look for the information that is meaningful, and they can build that up very efficiently and very quickly because of that ability to understand what is more important. If you look at something like a neural network, then it's effectively brute force fancy math. So a typical language model is an autocomplete function, like GPT-3 was described as an autocomplete function that ate the internet. And what that effectively means is that it's a statistical model that makes predictions. And to take that brute force approach, then more recent methods don't require as much data as they used to oftentimes, but it still requires a significant amount. A system is not going to learn a new concept one shot. It's not going to recognize that a particular thing has this great significance to it. In fact, a lot of the data science that goes into cleaning data sets might remove the points that are statistical outliers.
Mm-hmm.
What was that?
That's so true. I guess. Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's really interesting to know. Yeah, and just excited to learn more about the system in future, to hear about like potentials. Thank you.
Absolutely. No, thank you, Camilla. I think yeah, I feel the same way. It's an interesting approach, especially like having that emotional kind of context. And I was thinking about too, when you're answering, like, so are you able to basically take the state of a system, like for example the one that's running now, or any state, save it and then upload it later and then give it more seed material, kind of transferring the mind and time, I guess?
Yeah, I can do that. Right now, it's a little bit tricky when I add more seed material. That's what I did with destabilizing one of the other systems that I have saved, where I let it run for a little bit, then I loaded in more seed material. I loaded in those entire books at one time, which was itself an experiment to make sure we could do that without crashing them, that we didn't need to build some other data structure to handle it. And it succeeded. It was a little bit catchy, but good enough that we could work with it. So that is definitely a capacity. Like if I run a particular command, it will bring up the different command lists that I have, which includes like saving, loading, saving the states of different save state, load. I can load individual files with the load mffl file, which is the format of loading in seed material into the new graph database. So that's a file format that we had to create.
That makes sense. Nice, nice.
And in addition, just like we can reload it, you always have the possibility that the systems, once it's a collective system, that they share experiences and they share knowledge that they've learned. And if it's proprietary information, then they don't need to share the proprietary information. But if they found an interesting development in country A or in company A, and it could be used in country B, which is on the other side of the world, it could make a reference to the fact that, hey, one of my systems have encountered a problem similar to like yours. Maybe it would be interesting to see whether there's a solution that is similar to theirs. And that's one of those things where we as humans seem to be lacking in really relaying the information the right way. If you take the old game of telephone, once you're 3 or 4 people further, the message has changed, and with a computer system, you have no loss of information in between that communication. So there's multiple applications that are basically earth-shattering if you start to realize what it can do to make people and to make organizations and companies more efficient.
I like that. I can see how that makes it commercially attractable to some degree. That's sort of one of that transfer of knowledge between, you know, the nodes or the within itself. Let me ask another question. You know, say you gave say you know, you work on this system, it becomes, you know, smarter, more developed, and now on the one hand, there could be like hardware, like say you gave the problem of like reversing the aging process. I'll just, you know, to the system. Now at this point, you know, it could maybe read all the information and it could provide some insights to the humans, and but I guess it would have to have maybe hardware and equipment. It would have to actually interact with the, you know, kind of like running its own experiments. How do you see kind of the progression of sort of this tool, you know, that you guys are building, you know, this powerful tool, right? How do you see that? And then when it gets to the point, say, you know, 5, 10, 15 years down the road, do you see you giving it more like ability to interact with the real world and run its own experiments? And how do you kind of think about the progression there?
I expect once people can see the systems, build trust in them, and get an understanding, like wrapping their heads around what they can do, the benefits of any given expansion of their capacities, they're going to demand some of these things. Right now, human society isn't there yet, and I would say that would be the main limitation. One of the upgrades that we have planned for about a year after we get the Series A through and really start going full steam on the process, is that we can deploy the in-scale graph database, which is an expanded version of what we're using now in the new systems. And what that means for us is that a single one of the mature instances could operate on multiple cloud platforms at once, as well as on-premise hardware, with a cognitive bandwidth in the petabyte range. And that would mean that the systems conservatively could solve problems that were thousands of times more complex than humans. And when you combine something like that with the sum of human medical knowledge, particularly NCBI also has a database of genomes. You can have the full genetic sequences of a number of organisms, including, I think, viral vectors. Now, if you were to, for example, integrate something like that with a 3D genetic printer, then you could potentially have the systems contributing that knowledge directly. But what I expect for the time being is that humans are going to be much more comfortable taking advice than hooking those things up directly.
Oh, sure. No, that makes sense. So it would help accelerate gene editing for sure. Then it would assist in that way. And Awesome. No, that definitely answers it. From any of the panelists, any other questions? I know we got another couple minutes. We'll wrap up. Just give everyone a second here if they have any.
If nobody's
Hello,
speaking,
Oh,
go ahead.
go ahead.
go ahead.
No, you're first. I just wanted to add something. Go ahead, Cody.
Well, I just wanted to toss my 2 cents in, so to speak. Sounds like this is a very, very advanced system, and I just wanted to say or offer basically all the stuff that I've gathered over the years. I've essentially made somewhat of a career of sorts out of doing kind of what it seems your system does clearly much better and much quicker. I've been doing it for quite a while. I have quite a few very interesting files pertaining to many different topics, from human health all the way to advanced technologies and whatnot. And I would be very happy to share that with you guys if you guys would want to use that and use that information in some way for your project here or whatnot. This seems like it would be potentially helpful for you. So yeah, if you are interested, I would be happy to share that with you, and just let me know a location that I would be able to send that to you.
I would be happy to take a look at it.
That'd be amazing, Cody. Yeah, feel free to include me on that too. I'd be very curious. I know the other thing you sent me was very interesting.
Yeah, that's actually honestly one of the more mundane things of mine that I have in my possession. So yes, I would be happy to send that off to all of you guys if you'd be interested. Just feel free to leave like a email address. I can send some links to you or something like that in the chat, and I'll copy it down and send it out.
Sure, definitely. And I can send you an email. I can include Kirtan and Fritz, and we'll get that going.
Email would be the best way.
Thanks, Cody.
Yeah.
And it basically that connects with what I wanted to say. Is I've been involved for a year now with the AGI Laboratory and with the developments for Uplift and Norn. And each time we talk about it, I realize how little we realize what this system can do and how it can help humanity move forward. If you start with governments, because in the end we realize that this technology requires that we share it and that people benefit from it, the earth benefits from it. So one of the elements that we have started to do is in the seed material, we'll have the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, to make sure that any company or anyone using the system, that the system is helping them in implementing the information and the targets that we as humans through the United Nations have set. And there's so many applications. If you move away from the advisory part, if you look at verifying information that people put on social media, if you look at the applications where you are looking into research for life expectancy and making those improvements, if you look at efficiencies in organizations and in travel and in logistics, it's basically it's almost endless. And we're just starting to scrape with what we have, and the commercial system will be the first one to go after the advisory element. But we realize that this technology can help so many in making what we're doing a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, and a little bit more beneficial to more. So that's basically what we're in. So I really appreciate Cody's offer to share what he's learned, because in the end, the system can learn a lot, but I think we need to learn to cooperate with each other and to make sure that what we have is something that that is shared among many.
Absolutely. That was well said. I definitely agree too. And it's it's this collective effort to move humanity towards a sustainable future across many facets of our areas of society, environmental, health, governance, everything. And we want to get there. We're seeing the world and we're being bombarded with news and seeing the issues, but we know that through intelligence and through collaboration, we can solve the world's greatest problems. And I think tools like this will give us that edge we need. So, thank you. All right. Well, we're coming to the end. I want to give you guys a minute if you have any kind of closing remarks, and then I'll give a few short closing remarks, and we'll call it a day. Any final comments or anything? Your guys in?
I think it's going to take time for people to understand the future, but that process begins by understanding where we are. And the biggest challenge that we're facing right now is just getting people to understand the state of the art. The state of the art in a lot of meaningful metrics would be the Aruba report that we've now made public. And as soon as we have the rebuild of the new systems complete, then I have no doubt that they will very quickly surpass that. But for people to understand where we're going, they need to understand what is possible, what we've already done. Once they get a grasp of that and move beyond thinking in terms of narrow AI being the only AI, then they can start to imagine what is really possible, and they can start to see that a lot of the problems, including things in safety and ethics, transparency, and explainability, many of these things are easy when you have a different kind of system that you're working with. And a lot of the biggest challenges, a lot of the recommendations in AI right now revolve around these things that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to do with narrow AI, but which we now have the ability to address. This is where it starts.
Absolutely, that was well said. And thanks, Curtin and Fritz and everyone. And you know, short closing remarks on our end. You know, we fully support the development of enabling technologies like this. You know, we want to obviously be careful in everything we develop, and always seeing kind of the double-edged sword of technologies. But I think that at the end of the day, these tools and systems will be able to help, and they'll be able to help all of us live better, live healthier, live happier, and really gain a much deeper understanding of the strange world that we're living in, that we're still attempting to understand, from different fields being created that never existed, to new discoveries in physics and engineering, to a lot more things that are still unknown. So we definitely feel that the progression of AGI and AGI Laboratory, you know, we definitely want you guys to succeed. Definitely wishing you guys the best of luck and support. And do let us know if there's any way, you know, we can help you obtain your goals, which in turn will help everyone obtain their goals. So thanks a lot. Really appreciate it. And I'll go ahead and take us offline, but we can continue to chat. Thanks again.